Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
So today we're venturing into Jerusalem's history, but through a specific lens, Islamic endowments. These are often called Aqwaf.
Exactly. Think of them as, well, charitable trusts, set up often ages ago to support things like religious sites, schools, social welfare, basically forever.
And we're grounding this in a particular source, right?
Yes, mainly this very comprehensive study. It's called Islamic Aqwaf in Jerusalem, a historical study, Volume 1, prepared by Mohammed Hashem Gasha, reviewed by Khalid Al-Duri. It came out in Istanbul back in 2009.
Okay, volume 1. So our mission here is really to unpack what these Aqwaf tell us about Jerusalem over the centuries, using the examples from this book.
Precisely. We want to see how they shape the city's social fabric, its economy, its religious life. And honestly, the first thing that jumps out is just how much documentation still exists.
Yeah, that in itself says something.
It really does. It points to how incredibly important these endowments were consistently over a long, long time.
So where do we start? The book covers quite a span, doesn't it? Early Islamic period, Ayyubid, Mamluk.
Right. Let's dive into those early periods first.
Right.
The Ayyubid era gives us some fascinating, really concrete examples.
Okay, what's one of the standout early ones?
Well, probably the most significant early detailed one mentioned is the Waqf, set up by Sultan Saladin al-Ayyubi himself. This was specifically for the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Saladin, okay. And when was this?
It dates back to 587 AH, which is around 1191 or 1192 AD. So yeah, remarkably early to have this level of detail recorded.
Wow. And who exactly was meant to benefit from this endowment?
The document is apparently quite specific. It lists the Quran readers, the keepers or custodians of the sites, the muezzins, the ones who do the call to prayer, and also the general workers at both the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque.
That's incredibly detailed for the late 12th century. It paints a picture of a whole support system already in place.
It really does. It shows the priority wasn't just the buildings, but the people, the activities, the spiritual life associated with them.
And you mentioned documentation. This wasn't just a verbal promise, then.
Oh, no, not at all. The book emphasizes that it was officially recorded, with witnesses listed and everything. It was a formal legal act intended to be permanent.
That legal formality really underlines the seriousness of it.
Absolutely. It's about long-term commitment.
The study mentions other early ones, too. Saladin's brother, Al-Malik al-Adil Abu Bakr bin Ayyub.
Yes, she established a waqf for something called the Khanqa Salahiyya.
A khanqa? What's that exactly?
It's essentially a Sufi lodge, a place for mystics, for spiritual retreat, study, communal living.
Okay. And who benefited from his endowment?
Primarily the Sufis living there and also the poor in general. So you see this support extending beyond the major mosques to more specific spiritual communities and charitable needs.
And again, the book mentions specific conditions attached.
Yes, it does. While we don't have the full list here, the fact that conditions were stipulated shows, again, that careful thought went into how the endowment's resources should be managed and who should receive help. It wasn't just a blank check.
Makes sense. There's another one from Saladin mentioned for a madrasa, a school.
That's right, the Yusufiyya Madrasa. This one was located near the Lion's Gate.
And it served a particular group.
Yes, it specifically supported students of the Shafi'i School of Islamic Law.
Interesting detail. So, support for specific legal traditions within the city.
Exactly. It hints at the intellectual life and the established educational structures of Jerusalem at the time. Building schools was clearly a priority alongside the mosques.
And I gather this wasn't a small endowment either. It involved property.
Yes, the text mentions a detailed list of properties that were part of this waqf, providing the income to run the madrasa. And like the others, it came with its own set of conditions for how it should operate.
It's quite striking, this careful planning, this dedication of resources for education and religion so early on.
And the book's table of contents lists even more from that Ayyubid period, from figures like Al-Malik al-Afdal, Al-Malik al-Muazzam. It really does show it was a continuous established practice.
A deeply rooted tradition, then, right from the start.
Absolutely.
Right.
So these early examples give us a strong sense of focus on, well, religious institutions, the people serving them, and education. Did things change much as we move into the next major period, the Mamluk era?
That's the key question, isn't it? Did the types of endowments or their focus shift? So after the Ayyubids, we have the Mamluks. Did they just continue this tradition?
They definitely continued it, yes. I'd say they even expanded on it. The Mamluk period seems to have been a really prolific time for establishing Aqwaf in Jerusalem, often quite grand projects.
Can you give us some examples from that Mamluk time?
Sure. One prominent one mentioned is the WAC by Al-Malik al-Mansur Qalawun. This was for the Madrasa al-Mansuriya.
Another madrasa. Okay. Anything special about this one?
Well, the book notes a detailed inscription linked to this endowment. And inscriptions like that are gold mines for historians.
Right, because they're direct voices from the past.
Exactly. They often state the founder's name, why they built it, who it's for, sometimes even the rules. Direct evidence.
Fascinating. What other kinds of Mamluk endowments pop up?
We see support for different kinds of institutions. For example, Al-Ashraf Barzbeh established a WAC for both a ribat and a madrasa.
A rabat. What's that?
Sort of like a hostel or hospice. It could serve travelers, pilgrims, sometimes soldiers, or people dedicated to religious life. So support for visitors and residents alike.
Okay, so hostels joining the schools and mosques, the scope seems to be widening.
It does. And the diversity really increases. There are Mamluk Aqwaf mentioned specifically for the upkeep of the Dome of the Rock, for other madrasas like Al-Jawhariya and Al-Nusiriyah, and interestingly, even endowments for specific neighborhoods.
Neighborhoods, like a whole quarter of the city.
Yeah, the example given is the Maghriba quarter, the Moroccan quarter.
Wow. What would an endowment for a neighborhood even support?
It could be quite varied. Maybe upkeep of a local mosque or fountain, direct support for the poor living in that specific area, repairs to communal facilities.
Yeah.
It suggests a really localized level of social organization and welfare.
That's a layer I hadn't really considered. It paints a picture of a very sort of organized civic life funded through these aqua.
It certainly points that way. And if you just glance at the table of contents for the Mamluk section in the book,
I bet it's long.
it is. It really drives home the sheer number and variety. Schools, hostels, mosques, fountains, support for specific groups, specific places. It seems Aqwas permeated many aspects of Mamluk Jerusalem.
So a clear continuation and expansion through the Mamluk period. What about when the Ottomans took over? Did the system carry on?
Yes, absolutely. The Ottoman period, starting in the early 16th century, saw the Aqwa system continue as a fundamental part of Jerusalem's life. It was well established by then, and the Ottomans maintained it.
Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent is probably the most famous Ottoman sultan associated with Jerusalem's walls. Was he involved with Aqwaf too?
The overview doesn't single out huge new Aqwafs directly by him in this section, but given his known investments in Jerusalem, like the walls, it's almost certain he would have supported and regulated the existing system. The system thrived under Ottoman rule.
Does the book highlight any particular types of endowments that were common or perhaps new in the Ottoman era?
It does mention specific endowments for charitable kitchens. They're called imaret.
Ah, like soup kitchens.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Providing food for the poor, students, travelers, a very direct form of social welfare that continue to be supported through Aqwaf.
That seems like a consistent theme, direct support for the needy.
Definitely. And interestingly, the book also flags a section dealing with military aspects connected to Jerusalem's Aqwaf during Ottoman times.
Military aspects, how would that work?
Well, it's not fully detailed in the summary, but one could imagine endowments perhaps supporting garrison needs or upkeep of defensive structures, or maybe even supporting families of soldiers. It's an interesting angle.
It is. It adds another dimension to what these funds could be used for. Okay, so looking across all these periods, Ayyubid, Mamluk, Ottoman, what's the big picture here? What's the real significance of these Aqwasavis for understanding Jerusalem?
I think there are several key takeaways. First, they undeniably show a long, continuous, and deep Islamic commitment to Jerusalem. Not just conquering it, but investing in its religious, social, and intellectual life for centuries.
Yeah.
There were tangible evidence of that connection.
Right. It's not just abstract belief, it's concrete investment.
Precisely. Second, they reveal these really quite sophisticated social welfare systems. I mean, they function like the charities, the educational foundations, the social safety nets of their day, supporting everything from scholars to the poor to infrastructure.
Kind of like an early form of civil society support.
You could definitely see it that way.
Sure.
And third, from a purely historical perspective, the detailed records associated with them are invaluable. They give us insights into land ownership, urban development, economic activity, social structures, what people valued.
It's like reading the city's operational logs, in a way.
In a way, yes. You get glimpses into the priorities of the donors, the needs of the community. The details matter.
Were there any specific conditions mentioned, even briefly, that really jumped out at you as giving a unique insight?
While this overview doesn't go into extreme specifics, the constant mention that detailed conditions existed is itself significant. Instructions on how money should be spent, how property maintained, who qualifies as a beneficiary. It shows this wasn't just about giving money away. It was about responsible, long-term stewardship.
A real sense of legacy and planning for the future.
Absolutely, a vision extending potentially hundreds of years.
So for listeners trying to get a handle on Jerusalem's complex history, looking at these Akaf offers a really concrete way in, doesn't it? These specific examples provide those aha moments.
I think so. They move beyond just dates and rulers to show how society actually functioned, what held it together, and what people cared about enough to invest in perpetuity. It adds a richness you don't get from a simple timeline.
This has been incredibly illuminating. It really opens up a different way of seeing the city's past. If you had to boil it down, what are the main things you hope people take away from this discussion?
I'd say three things, mainly. One, Islamic endowments, Awqaf, were absolutely central to Jerusalem's life for centuries. Vital. Two, they reflect this deep, ongoing commitment to the city's religious significance, but also its social and economic health. And three, the detailed records left behind are an amazing resource, giving us a rich tapestry of daily life, values, and organization in Jerusalem's past.
It really makes you think. You see this incredible long-term vision, this detailed planning embedded in endowments from centuries ago.
Yeah.
And it prompts a question for today, doesn't it? What can we actually learn from this legacy? About, sustainable community support, about long-term development. How do these historical models stack up against our modern ideas of charity or philanthropy?
That's a powerful question to reflect on. How does that deep sense of enduring responsibility compare to today's approaches?
Definitely food for thought. Thank you so much for walking us through this.
My pleasure. It's a fascinating topic.